salir de la... Oh, hi Loretta, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you perfectly. So your voice is fine, I think. Okay, voy a dar la introducción en castellano y luego Javier y Elvin van a hablar en... Loretta, Javier y Elvin van a hablar en inglés, pero hay traducción simultánea afuera para que se la consigan. Bueno, primero decir que el libro no está a la venta en este momento acá, hay que comprarlo en Amazon o lo pueden comprar en el sitio web de Polity Press, que es la editorial. Ahí aparece el precio también del libro. Lamento no tener copias, pero no fue posible contar con unas copias para proceder a la venta. Casos de gentrificación están apareciendo en los medios, en la prensa, en la literatura, en todas partes, en México, la transformación del borde del río en Buenos Aires se ha definido como un caso de gentrificación. La transformación de la zona portuaria de México se ha definido por varios autores como un proceso que genera niveles de desplazamiento y tensión de clase, la reestructuración espacial de Río de Janeiro. Hay autores que hablan del consumo cultural y sobre todo la comodificación o la mercantilización de la imagen popular de las favelas de Río de Janeiro. Hay autores que han puesto mucho énfasis en el desplazamiento de los sujetos populares de zonas clave en la Ciudad de México, como el barrio de Santa Fe, que expulsa familias pobres, recicladores de basura que viven ahí para convertirlo en un supercentro de negocios. El turismo acelerado y explotador de propiedades del Centro Histórico de Panamá, que en el lapso de 10 años quintuplican el valor y son consumidos por élites y sobre todo compradores de tercera edad de Estados Unidos y de Europa. La transformación de los espacios públicos en Quito. Si bien hay un programa de vivienda social también en el centro de Quito que es loable, pero los espacios públicos blanqueados, segurizados, excluyentes, y etcétera, etcétera, etcétera. Llegamos al caso chileno, que lo he documentado bastante yo en mis trabajos, así como otros autores chilenos, y donde el paisaje de la renovación urbana y de la vivienda que incrementan un 100% del 2000 al 2010 su valor en el centro de Santiago, se mezcla con zonas de deterioro y zonas de decadencia, en lo que Elvin, Wyly y Dan Happel en el 99 llamaron como las islas de deterioro. Este libro proviene de un proyecto que es de bastante larga data. Nosotros comenzamos con Loretta y con Hyun. También incluimos a la profesora Hilda Herzer del Instituto Gino Germani de Buenos Aires, quien lamentablemente falleció al poco comenzar este proyecto. Y comenzamos este proyecto con 2 workshops. Uno ocurrió en Londres y el otro ocurrió aquí en Santiago, en la CEPAL. Trajimos bastantes autores y logramos producir un número importante de productos académicos y de publicaciones. El libro Global Gentrifications, que es un libro editado, se publicó el año pasado, 2015, por la editorial Policy Press, y 2 números especiales, uno en Urban Studies, acerca de Locating Gentrification in the Global East, y el otro Latin American Gentrifications, que acaba de salir a la luz en la revista Urban Geography para que lo vean. O sea, aquí hay un corpus de trabajo colegial de distintos autores de diversas proveniencias que nos dedicamos a hablar del tema, y la pregunta es, bueno, ¿por qué estamos haciendo esto? ¿Por qué necesitamos hablar del tema desde una perspectiva distinta a la que tradicionalmente se ha hecho? ¿Por qué hacer un libro ahora y por qué terminar este proyecto largo con Loretta y con Hyun, terminando con este libro monográfico que aborda la gentrificación desde una perspectiva planetaria? Ejemplo, el diario El Guardian, hace un mes más o menos, habla acerca de gentrificación a escala global. Básicamente se focaliza en los casos europeos, norteamericanos, canadienses, australianos, y pone como excepción Perú, México y Argentina, que es un avance, pero se sigue pensando a nivel internacional en la gentrificación como un hecho que es propiamente descriptor de procesos de cambio de barrios que están ocurriendo en las ciudades del norte global, si las vamos a llamar así. Por tanto, este libro, ¿qué quiere hacer? ¿Qué implica este libro? Primero, disputar esa hegemonía anglosajona del término. El término gentrificación no es un término apropiado a una ciudad en específico ni a determinadas ciudades que corresponden a un marco cultural o un marco nacional. Ya pareciera ser absurdo pensar que es una cosa de Nueva York o Londres. Las diferencias entre Nueva York y Londres y las diferencias entre Toronto, Vancouver, Sydney y Ciudad del Cabo y lo que sea, son tan amplias, son tan divergentes en muchos casos en términos de política de vivienda, de políticas de suelo, de transformaciones socioculturales. Entonces, tratar de aglutinar esto como en una órbita norte-occidental, la gentrificación como un descriptor que solamente puede ser aplicado ahí, resulta en este momento ya superado. Luego quisimos evitar una producción colonial del conocimiento. Esto es algo que hemos venido hablando bastante y nos basamos en algunos autores, y Loretta se va a expresar en mayor detalle con eso. Quisimos, en cambio, en vez de esta visión teórica proveniente de determinada latitud aplicada en los casos de estudio del sur global, nosotros quisimos apuntar a una producción más colegial y más coproducción, donde los casos del sur generan teoría y generan aporte teórico y revisan las teorías que provienen de otras latitudes. Es muy circunstancial que la gentrificación se haya definido por primera vez como término en Londres en 1964. Andy Merrifield ahora acuña el concepto de neo-hausmanización y dice que las transformaciones de clase brutales provenientes del Estado provienen de Haussmann de París de 1850. Ahora, si bien nos focalizamos en casos del sur global, no ignoramos en el libro los casos del norte global, asumimos todos los casos a un mismo nivel analítico comparativo. Aquí hay un esfuerzo de urbanismo comparativo intenso, en el libro ustedes lo pueden leer, en ese caso en la introducción, donde está muy bien explicado, creo yo. Y luego exploramos la teoría de la gentrificación de una forma localizada y deslocalizada, básicamente siguiendo a Doreen Macy, que es un trabajo ya clásico del 93. Donde la unicidad por una parte del contexto específico y por otra parte la generalidad de las estructuras que van transformando la ciudad en el marco del capitalismo son dos caras de la misma moneda y cada una de estas interpretaciones permite entender la otra, es decir, no es una contradicción que no se pueda resolver en una síntesis, es una contradicción productiva al pensar la gentrificación como un proceso general, pero también como un proceso que tiene particularidades. Y por último es un equipo de investigación multicultural, es Loretta, que es británica, Hyun, que es coreano, pero trabaja en Londres, yo que soy chileno y tuve formación en Inglaterra, pero sin embargo, aparte del idioma en común en el que escribimos, tenemos diferentes interpretaciones y correspondemos a diferentes formas de interpretar. Me voy a saltar esto es una clasificación bien interesante que pueden encontrar en el libro acerca de lo que nosotros entendemos como una interpretación basada en la gentrificación constreñida a determinados barrios, una visión estática probablemente cuando la casuística de la gentrificación estaba muy restringida a determinados lugares. Y luego una definición relacional y comparativa de la gentrificación, que es lo que nosotros deberíamos hacer y lo que nosotros estamos invitando a hacer a través de este libro. Hay una evidente necesidad de agradecer y decir y mencionar el trabajo los planteamientos fundacionales de Henri Lefebvre con la teoría de la revolución urbana. Y voy a leer una cita de Lefebvre que está traducida por mí. El circuito principal de la producción industrial retrocede y fluye hacia el de la propiedad, es decir, la inversión de capital en el segundo sector de desarrollo inmobiliario. La especulación con suelo urbano se convierte entonces en la fuente principal, casi exclusiva, el campo de formación y realización de la plusvalía. Por lo tanto, el segundo circuito del capital suplanta el primer circuito y se convierte en esencial. Lo que hablamos ayer en la mesa con Elvin, donde estuvimos acá, acerca del reemplazo, y con Matías Carretón, que está presente acá también, el reemplazo de la economía y la imposición, el crecimiento de los sectores inmobiliarios en las economías del mundo y de muchos países del norte y del sur del planeta, que están basando su economía y están basando su estructura sociológica y de funcionamiento y las geografías de la población y de la ciudad se están basando en cada vez más tasas más intensificadas de especulación con suelo, lo cual genera efectos importantísimos en el desplazamiento de clase, como ustedes pueden ver en el libro. Esta es la estructura del libro, los tópicos son nosotros tratamos de darle un énfasis a tópicos emergentes como las nuevas urbanizaciones, la gentrificación en nuevas urbanizaciones, en periferias urbanas, el nuevo urbanismo como un factor gentrificador, las nuevas economías de la gentrificación, si bien seguimos pensando en los tremendos rent gaps que se generan en las ciudades, pero la forma en que estos se acumulan, se producen, se explotan son divergentes y son distintos. Las clases globales, las migraciones, los aspectos transnacionales, incluso la réplica y el viaje de políticas públicas y la copia de políticas públicas de un lado a otro. Luego la gentrificación sigue siendo, y esta es una pregunta, sigue siendo como un anteproyecto, sigue siendo como un patrón que se replica, o más bien son circunstancias locales contextualizadas. Y luego aspecto muy emergente que llama mucho la atención en América Latina y en Asia, que es la gentrificación de las favelas o de los slums, o gentrificación de los lugares de la informalidad. La comodificación a través de política pública y a través del acceso al mercado formal de los lugares de la informalidad, de la pobreza y de la miseria. Y luego las altísimas tasas de desplazamiento que se generan, sobre todo en los casos asiáticos. Gracias. Ahora va a hablar Loretta Liz acerca del libro. Adelante, Loretta. Come on, Loretta. It's your turn now to speak.
Okay, thank you, Ernesto. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Great, okay. So, I'm not sure what slides you're going to use, but I'm just going to talk anyway. Okay, so what I'd like to start off with is thinking about the coining of the term gentrification in London, and that was by a British sociologist from Germany called Ruth Glass. And I guess one of the reasons that we set about this book was a concern that lots of people were still quite obsessed with this quite dated and quite contextually specific definition. Shall I allow for translation?
No. We have direct translation. Everything you say in English, people
so I
here
can
can
just keep
understand.
going. Okay, cool.
So it's perfect.
Okay, so one of the things that interests me certainly in this project was that back in 2014, it was the 50th anniversary of the coining of this term gentrification. So I went to a conference at UCL in London on this. And as part of getting ready for this conference, I set about reading and rereading a lot of Ruth Glass's work. And what was really interesting to me, it was that actually she'd written a whole pile of other stuff that most people have not actually looked at. And one of the kind of bodies of work is really interested in how kind of Western theorizing is quite hegemonic. So in many ways, hers was a kind of prescient kind of comparative urbanism. She had real concerns that the kind of industrial models of urbanization that the West were using to theorize the city were really not appropriate in what she then called the undeveloped or less developed world. The other thing that she was concerned about was the lack of evidence or the lack of empirical material on many processes outside of the West. And so what interested me was actually how there'd been a lot of discussion about global gentrification, but actually, empirically, the kind of evidence base for this was very, very limited. It was a couple of, well-known academics who might have travelled to an academic conference and seen something similar on another side of the world, but actually the kind of real research was quite limited, if non-existent. So one of the things that Ruth Glass wanted to do was kind of remove theory from what she calls the shock of urbanisation. And of course in the UK and also in Western Europe, urbanisation was a big shock because industrialisation happened relatively quickly. And, the kind of result of that, the industrial city had a variety of social problems and caused lots of kind of problematic living conditions, like Frederick Engels talked about, etc. So it's interesting to think about this shock of urbanisation if you take it outside of the West and outside of the kind of 19th century city. And certainly if you look at the work that Hun Shin's done on China, you do get a sense of this shock of urbanisation, but in a different time period, in a very different context. But theorising it means something quite different. So what we really wanted to do was question this notion of a global gentrification. And we wanted to be open to the suggestion that actually maybe gentrification wasn't happening all over the world. And I think we were. But actually what we found when we brought together scholars from all over the world, when we did lots of our own kind of hunting down of various literatures, was that in fact gentrification had spread globally, not in the 21st century, but actually some time ago, that many of the processes of gentrification in cities that only are beginning to call it gentrification now had actually happened before or during the same time period as in British cities, for example. So the kind of idea that somehow gentrification had gone from the West to the East or from the global North to the global South actually made no sense in many ways because the evidence kind of turned that on its head. I think one of the things that I certainly got out of this book, and I think Ernesto and Hyun also, was the kind of collegiality that went into co-producing this book. So it wasn't just our own work, we're drawing on work by scholars from around the world, much of it not written in English, but luckily because there was enough languages spoken between us, we were able to access work that, many English-speaking or Anglo-American scholars haven't perhaps looked at before. And I think there is a real value, if you're doing comparative urban work, to working as a team rather than working as a single researcher. So I guess the other thing we did is that we didn't simply think, okay, let's step outside the global north, turn our lens round and start looking at the global south. We developed a much more relational model than that. And at the end of the day, we wanted to keep that kind of tension between current global north theorising on gentrification and processes of urbanisation that had already been named gentrification or had not yet been named gentrification, and to bring them into the picture. So it was not completely ignoring the usual suspects, but it was certainly incorporating as many non-usual suspects as we could manage to gather from both East Asia, from Latin America, and also from South Asia and South Africa. And certainly the work that we did, I think, became quite historical at times, so we had to adopt a historical stance, because if you don't understand the specifics of urbanisation in the different contexts you're working in, then you can't make sense of current urban processes. So there was a lot of kind of groundwork looking at urban histories around the world, which I think was really interesting, and really interesting for me, certainly comparatively. So I think what we've really produced in this book then is something that's a very embedded kind of understanding of gentrification, but it's a very relational understanding. So the different cities that we're looking at, we kind of look at them all on a level playing field. We don't argue that London's more important than Cape Town or New York's more important than Beijing. They all are equal conceptually and theoretically, and that was something that we were quite clear about, and it's something that we drew on, particularly from Jenny Robinson's work in comparative urbanism. And just one final comment, I think some people have, the kind of underpinning theoretical framework for the book, and the thing that connects myself, Ernesto and Hyun, is, a real interest in critical political economy, in this case drawing on the work on planetary urbanisation somewhat, but particularly on the work from Henri Lefebvre, as Ernesto's just said. But I think the other thing that we do is that rather than drawing theoretically on the work on comparative urbanism or the new work on comparative urbanism, rather we used it as a kind of methodological construct to enable ourselves to do the work we wanted. So I think some people have kind of said, well, actually, you're doing critical political economy, but you're also doing this very cultural work from comparative urbanism, and they're incompatible. But I guess our response would be that that's not quite how the kind of production of the book operated. One was a body of kind of theoretical framing, and the other was methodology. So I think that's about it. That's what I'm going to say.
Thank you very much, Loretta, for your words, and I think you gave us a clear glimpse of what this book is about. And now we are going to give the voice to Elvin, Wyly, and then Javier Ruiz-Tagle for their comments. So please stay there and try to listen to what this guy had to say about the book. You have to use this one.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because this sound that goes
Hi, Loretta.
Hi, Elvin.
good to see you.
Long time no see.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you. This is a wonderful opportunity to talk about a process that started out portrayed as small, localized, neighborhood scale, and often kind of like quaint. A lot of people saw gentrification as this really tiny little niche element of the housing market in a lot of different cities. And gentrification is now global. This curious word, as Loretta has described, was coined to describe changes in a neighborhood in London in 1964, and then that discourse spread afterwards to other cities, even though that process itself has a longer history. So it was named in 1964, so to say that gentrification is now global, however, is not to suggest that the process began in a place like London and then spread to New York and then spread to other cities and then diffused to other parts of the world. That's not what this is about. Instead, it's to suggest that the hierarchical structuring of urban space has always been a part of global urbanism and global colonialism and global capitalism. And so that gives it a long history of generations and even centuries. What we are now seeing when I talk about global gentrification and planetary gentrification, and there's a whole theoretical and discursive shift in terms of that word, planetary versus global, what we're seeing is not any sort of diffusionist process, but a series of convergences and intersections and collisions in an increasingly transnational world, an increasingly interconnected world, and so multiple distinctive and indigenous forms of gentrification, the hierarchical structuring of urban space, are playing out. And that's what is so extraordinary about this book. So it's a perfect kind of half-century advance from Ruth Glass kind of giving us this word to talk about this, and then the enormous literatures over the course of the half-century are really kind of refracted through an amazing theoretical framework and methodology used in collaborative knowledge production in this. So it's exciting and it's overwhelming. So I apologize, this is an author meets the critics session, but it's really an author meets the admirers section. I want to use this book as a guide, as a manifesto, also as an analytical and strategic guidebook for how to organize and resist in a world of gentrification, because we have this plurality of local expressions and local processes. And these are the ones that get people to really talk about these things, is the local and distinctive things. And the extraordinary difference shines through in this work, and then also in just, when you talk to people in different cities. And just give you a sample here, the massive capital switching documented in Santiago in the 1970s and 1980s, the first experiment in global neoliberalization. But the favela chic and the pacification of Rio de Janeiro, Mukesh Mehta, a Long Island developer who was born in Mumbai but now is in Long Island, and he's coming back to Vision Mumbai to redevelop Dharavi, Asia's largest slum. Puerto Rico's HUD-funded demolition of Las Gladiolas, the makeovers and fakeovers, false historic preservation in parts of Beijing and Shanghai, Casco Antigua in Panama City, that very transnationalized gentrification, and then the creative city process in Shenzhen. Extraordinary differences come out of these examples, and yet the key is this a common phenomenon? Is it gentrification? And that's kind of it's a really interesting process now. A lot of people at the cutting edge of theory are actually attacking the word gentrification, the concept gentrification, and kind of like the critical scholarship of people who are trying to question its inequalities. They're saying, well, that's colonial. That's a colonial imposition because it only applies to the global north. And what I think is so powerful about this book is it takes that critique seriously, but then it also helps us to show that gentrification has magnified inequalities in so many different contexts, while still unifying the processes by which inequalities are intensified, justified, and reproduced, despite all that difference, so that there is something valuable. My friend Dan Hamill years ago, in a different context, in different literatures, when people were talking about the fine-grained points about the rent gap and all the rent gap and all that sort of stuff, he was saying, well, okay, maybe we want to call it urban restructuring, but he said, you're not going to get a crowd of people coming out behind a banner that says, stop urban restructuring. But you can do it with neoliberalism, and you can do it with gentrification. So there is a discursive thing in here. I see this as very powerful intergenerational, and for me, there are two aspects of intergenerational advance. One is the production of intergenerational knowledge. So Neil Smith gives birth intellectually to Jason Hackworth, Cindy Katz to Caitlin Cahill, Loretta to Tom Slater and Mark Davidson. But another aspect is kind of the unfinished projects of a previous generation. So this advances in a major way what Neil Smith was trying to do before he died several years ago. It also advances Jim Blout's work on the colonizer's model of the world and how to replace that. Julie Graham's work on non-capitalist ways of understanding globalization. and also Ruth Glass. I'm really, really excited about the connections to the 2014 UCL conference. Just an amazing thing. I'm just going to end with a couple of questions for us to think about. One, there is a point where you're describing the Shenzhen creative city policy and the Huku household registration system. And it's a side comment, but I'm really obsessed with it. And you say, dare we say social eugenics in terms of the redevelopment of the city within the broader national economy? And I'm really, really excited about that because I also spent a little bit of time recently going back and rereading some of what Ruth Glass was writing in the early 1960s. And my perspective is, I don't think that she meant gentrification as a local neighborhood process. It was already understood in a very, in a way that is very consistent with contemporary post-colonial cosmopolitan views of the world and rising competition. And so I wanted to maybe, think about that. Second, there's in talking about the urbanization of China, the distinct temporal waves of northern gentrification are all happening at once in China. It's a brilliant quote, and it makes me think about time and space, and it also makes me think that the stage theories of gentrification that we used to talk about, it starts with the risky artists and pioneers, and then eventually it gets to the super gentrification, pricing out everyone. Whether these distinct temporal waves are intersecting and happening at once in places beyond China, can we generalize that to a wider spectrum of the world urban system? I think this is an amazing theoretical possibility. And then the third question is simply for us to think more carefully about the brilliant suggestion at the end of the book about localized action plans to challenge planetary gentrification. I was really excited about the mixture of commonality and difference in terms of the role of the state. When is there a role to engage with the state as an ally to protect against the inequalities of gentrification? And when does it require resisting the state when the state is the active gentrifier, is actively guiding the bulldozer, as it were? Anyway, so those are just three things that I think about, but I think this is just an amazing book, and I'm scribbling notes all over the place. I don't even have time to go through more of it. So wonderful. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity of being here. Sorry guys, I'm going to talk in English, but I will start with a few words in Spanish. Quisiera saludar y dar mi apoyo a dos movimientos sociales que están manifestándose hoy en día. Primero, saludar a los funcionarios de esta universidad, la Universidad de Chile, por estar trabajando a pesar de estar en un paro indefinido por sueldos dignos. Y segundo, todo mi apoyo al paro nacional y llamado a protesta del movimiento No Más AFP, que está luchando para terminar con una de las principales herencias económicas de la dictadura en este país, lo cual coincidentemente está muy ligado al tema del libro que nos convoca. Hay varios nexos. And now, back in English. So translator is going to get crazy with me. I will not make any comment on the title, especially the word planetary, since I believe it's an unfruitful exercise and part of a different debate. I can start saying that I know Ernesto very closely because as a former professor at the University of Chile, we managed to share an office space and several insightful conversations about his research projects and publications. I have also published different works with him, and I'm currently working as a co-PI in an exciting comparative project on gentrification in Santiago and 3 other Latin American cities. And through Ernesto, I have had the privilege of knowing the work of Loretta and Hyun, both global experts in the field. And most importantly, I have seen the evolution of their work as a team for the book Global Gentrifications in 2015, and the special issues for urban geography on Latin American gentrification and for urban studies on gentrification in the Global East, both about to be published in 2016 or already published. thus moving the agenda to include almost the entire world in the analysis of a highly pervasive problem. So here we are not just talking about 3 authors for one book, but about a highly prolific and cohesive team who have put gentrification research on a qualitatively higher level. Here in Chile and in Latin America, it's very welcome to see that a book starts criticizing its own colonial research tradition, which the authors call Western ideology of urbanism, and opens up to study the world of cities from a perspective that leaves the first world in a secondary position, or at least in the same playing field. We would have loved, however, that such book would have written by 3 Global South authors and published by a Global South publisher, but at least you have Ernesto in the team, and that's a very good sign. And the fact that the first global perspective on gentrification is done from a critical political economy approach is also reassuring, given its potential for reaching unexpected corners of the world. The book is also very serious and responsible with inescapable contemporary debates. And 2 debates are obvious for a book that's called Planetary Gentrification. One debate is about the question about post-colonial theorizing, and the second is the question about the ever-expanding definition of gentrification and thus its complex applicability to a wide array of contexts. Through a critical urban political economy approach, although proposing a comparative relational perspective, both very long names, the book focuses on the role of the state and blame it for a number of processes and insists on the relevance of capital flow and fixity at different scales. The chapters of the book offer a variety of insights about the problem of gentrification, from the critique of the center-periphery dichotomy and the emphasis on the variegated forms and scales of urbanization in Chapter 2, the several economic issues that are involved in gentrification, from the global to the local and the other way around in Chapter 3, the observations of the diverse manifestations of middle-class gentrifiers, although reminding us that they are not a necessary condition for gentrification to happen, in Chapter 4, the account of gentrification as a mobile project or policy around the world with all the richness of local context and intermediary processes in Chapter 5, the alert the authors pose regarding capital flow through land in slums and their process of large displacement in Chapter 6, and the excellent examples of processes that are usually not called gentrification in their own context, referring to mega-gentrification and mega-displacement in Chapter 7. The book largely accomplishes its main goal. It offers rich and diverse material and mountains of evidence to demonstrate the point that the concept of gentrification has indeed a global application. And through the book, the authors develop a robust definition which aims at being general enough to facilitate universality and flexible enough to account for local circumstances. And in that exercise, they accomplish another goal. They give a scholarship from the Global South the opportunity to offer lessons to the Global North, which is unprecedented in the field of urban studies, and I suppose is unprecedented in most disciplines of the social sciences as well. After all these accolades, I will offer you 2 minor but not very important critiques and 1 suggestion. So I will play the role of the critics. Author meets the critics. A first critique is that I found almost no account of displacement with contents different than poverty. This is, revanchism can be directed not only to the lower class, but also to other discriminated groups in terms of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and so on. Of course, these groups are part of the lower class too, but non-class factors have demonstrated to complicate the phenomenon of discrimination, criminalization, and stigmatization that poor residents suffer before being displaced. And by the way, this is part of a political economy approach as well. A second critique is that the authors sustain that despite the different causes in different places, gentrification has the same central effects of displacement. But this seems to me really dubious. One thing is to focus the book on displacement as a consequence, but given the extremely wide variety of processes, it seems unlikely that the effects of gentrification be the same everywhere. If the common factor to call a problem gentrification is displacement, then it's rather obvious that the effects of the problem in different contexts will be alike. But this is to characterize a problem by its consequence and not by its core processes, which is a major goal of the book. Maybe it's not just displacement, and different processes produce a number of different outcomes attached to it, and displacement could even be the least important of them. In the end, I find this to be the weakest part of the book, since there is almost no space for the effects of gentrification, except when talking about spatial capital. And finally, a suggestion. The sections on resistance to displacement and alternative to displacement in the conclusions are long enough to be converted into another chapter, which will be a significant contribution. Maybe a second edition of the book can be a good opportunity for it, and I'm sure you will have the opportunity for doing that. Despite these minor shortcomings, I still believe this is a great book, which I strongly recommend for all students of urban issues and for other disciplines as well. The wide coverage and detail of cases around the world is surprising. It's the first time, and this is honestly, I read a book that gives such a comprehensive account of a social problem. Even those that claim to be comprehensive and comparative usually end up describing the usual suspects of the Global South. And I guess Abdul Malik Simon will pardon me, but like Johannesburg, Mumbai, Beijing, Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, and Mexico City are all usual suspects right now of the Global South, and major scholarship is written about those cities, and not all the rest that are much more in number. The problem of gentrification has so many dimensions, cultural, economic, political, etc. And this book not only addresses them all very carefully, but also from the perspective of an extensive array of countries and regions. I congratulate the authors for this amazing work, and I'm sure the book will be path-breaking, not only for studies of gentrification, but for comparative urban studies as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Elvin and Javier for their really insightful comments. And Hyun, can you hear me?
Yes, but the sound is...
I think we lost the sound.
Okay, the sound is... Can you hear me well, or you sound in Spanish?
Can you increase the volume a little bit? Yes.
Okay, could you hear what Elvin and Javier said? Loretta, would you like to reply first?
I can't understand anything.
Oh, it's a pity.
I can't hear you.
So
It's very difficult to hear you, despite increasing the volume from my end.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Good. Would any of you would like to reply to the critics first? Then I go second or third.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I can make a quick reply on the last two comments about displacement and resistance, which I think were really important. The problem we had with the book is that what we wrote was a lot longer, obviously, than what ended up getting submitted. So we had a whole pile of material, particularly on resistance, that got cut out, that's still kind of sitting on our cutting room table. And I think really resistance now is the most important thing to be looking at in gentrification. And I think that, that deserves a book in its own right, let alone, a kind of expanded chapter. But two things. One, I think you're wrong. I think displacement is what makes gentrification. Otherwise, it could be categorized as urban regeneration or, some other term. And I think it is critical and important to keep displacement as one of the kind of central features. But I agree that there was not a lot of writing in the book about the effects of displacement. And those effects are very, very different in different places. The processes of displacement are very, very different. But this is actually a whole body of work that we're working on at the moment. In fact, the three of us were in Berlin 2 weeks ago at a workshop that's explicitly looking at this. But what we felt was that there wasn't enough work on this in order to be able to write something effectively. But I think that's work that's beginning to emerge and is really, really important. Maybe Hyun has something to say.
Yes, can you hear me from here? All right, so well, thank you so much again for those two very insightful critiques, and I very much enjoyed listening to the comments. I'm very happy to be part of this very exciting event, despite being here stuck in London. It's very rainy and very dark outside. We'll probably do a quick comment as a response to both commentators. Yes, I think it's quite true that in the Global South, we are largely looking at Beijing, Cape Town, Mumbai, and Seoul, and a few more. But these are, yes, as this colleague says, these are the usual suspects in the Global South. And I think there is definitely more scope to look at other cities, other smaller cities, regional cities, which are in the shadow of these mega cities that we usually observe. And I think this is where the scholarship needs to further develop. And I think there are emerging researchers who are having this awareness and who are investing their time to look at these experiences in less major cities. And I think there will be, hopefully, in time to come, more contributions to be made in order to broaden our coverage of cities in the Global South. To Elvin's question, yes, the whole idea of China experiencing some sort of social eugenic process of development, I very much agree. I mean, this is something very worrying to some extent, especially when you look at cities like Beijing, which are basically implementing some sort of population sorting at the city scale. So the government is already producing this policy and has put in place for several years in displacing people at the lower rank of the population, people who are engaging in low-end service industries, migrant workers who are not skilled enough to stay in the city center. And basically, city center is trying to accommodate only those very highly skilled migrants, and also who are deemed appropriate for the city to contain and accommodate in the city center. And Beijing basically using it as a way of promoting the city as world city. So this, basically the last few years of urbanization was really involving a citywide and perhaps region-wide population sorting process, which actually goes beyond a simple neighbor scale. So I very much agree with Elvin that there's a huge area of more critical intervention in this process to understand truly what the urbanization led by such authoritarian development-oriented state has been carrying out and facilitating in conjunction with businesses and other more affluent classes. The second aspect, the process in China displaying very distinctive experience of many different urban processes taking place at the same time. Again, I can't agree more with this understanding, because as Elvin was saying in his commentary earlier, the whole production hierarchical structure of urban space, and in addition to this relational understanding of space allows us to basically discuss gentrification on the one hand in a very relative way, so that we actually juxtapose the experience of gentrification with other experiences that we come across in cities, but at the same time going kind of being careful about not to simply reject the idea of gentrification because it is not readily observed in the way that we've been traditionally understanding. Because there are, this process itself can reflect the hierarchical structure of urban space, as Elvin says. And I think it's the researchers' responsibility to be more aware of different spaces emerging, different processes corresponding to this hierarchical structure of space, so that we become more careful about discussing these processes that we sometimes tend to narrow down too much and produce a bit of, I don't know, something that we kind of produce as a straw man to attack or to reject or to further accept. So I think there's a need for more hierarchical and relational understanding of space that can come into the discussion of gentrification and also in urban studies broadly.
Thank you very much, Hyun and Loretta, for your responses. I'm going into Spanish now. If you want to use if the translation can go to London, please, would be fine. Acerca de la crítica de Javier, bueno, primero, muchas gracias a los dos, porque me parecieron fantásticos los comentarios y las críticas harsh de Javier Ruiz-Tagle, me parecieron increíbles, y me quiero hacer cargo de la primera, de que el desplazamiento lo conceptualizamos y lo verificamos casi exclusivamente desde la perspectiva de clase. Es un poco harsh la crítica, porque no es tan así, creo yo. En el caso mexicano, el proceso de blanqueamiento que nosotros documentamos es bien polisémico y tiene mucho que ver con el color de la piel de las poblaciones de clase media que están llegando a vivir ahí. Y la tensión que se genera en sociedades urbanas con una componente indígena en América Latina también es fuerte y nosotros lo documentamos. Probablemente faltó enfatizar más de aquello y son limitaciones que el libro evidentemente tiene. Pero lo segundo que me gustaría decir es que en los casos que vemos en la India sobre todo, los aspectos religiosos que están involucrados en el desplazamiento y cómo se privilegian las minorías o las mayorías correspondientes a determinado segmento religioso, desfavoreciendo otras y también desfavoreciendo grupos étnicos que viven en los mismos espacios y se disputan los mismos espacios. Son componentes muy importantes. Y las referencias teóricas que nosotros utilizamos en el libro para hablar de la India, creo que todas ellas cumplen con esa condición. Evidentemente que en muchos otros lugares las ascripciones de género, las expresiones de sexualidad, las diferencias que no tienen que ver exclusivamente con clase, evidentemente que son presentes y están presentes y deberían nutrir una investigación de gentrificación hoy. Ahora, como último comentario, y quiero darle la palabra después a las personas del público que están acá por si quieren comentar o referirse en algo de estos puntos u otros. El último comentario es decir, se está en este momento en la oportunidad de abrir aún más la investigación de gentrificación. Y una de las aperturas, y eso lo estábamos hablando hace 3 semanas atrás en Berlín con Hyun y con Loretta, una de las aperturas importantes que está habiendo ahora es la reapertura hacia los estudios de gentrificación desde una perspectiva de género y de expresión de sexualidad como elementos, factores que generan disparidad, generan desplazamiento y generan injusticia urbana. Es, como bien dijo Elvin, es un eslabón intergeneracional este libro, creo yo. Y ahora van a seguir habiendo más estudios y lo bueno es que se están haciendo más estudios de gentrificación y gente nueva se está metiendo acá en este tema y se está generando una disputa y una reflexión colectiva a nivel planetario que yo creo que va a ser bastante importante para los próximos años. Así que eso era lo que quería decir. Y ahora me gustaría, si hay comentarios, levantaste la mano, no. Si alguien quiere hacer comentarios o referirse a algún punto de lo que estamos exponiendo acá, por favor. O preguntas. Sí, Matías. Y luego Abdul Malik. We are going to collect several questions and then we'll reply. Okay? We need a microphone to Matías. Please. Al otro lado, Constanza, allá. Y después a tu marido. Lisa, ok, soy yo.
Sí. Bueno, primero que todo, muchas gracias por este gran libro, por estarlo presentando acá. Realmente un privilegio contar con este tipo de material producido en gran parte acá en Chile, así que muchas felicitaciones a los autores, concuerdo con la apreciación general de los críticos, admiradores, me siento uno más de ellos, digamos. Ahora, me gustaría volver un poco a la cosa de a este debate, ya entre si estamos definiendo gentrificación por su naturaleza fundamental o por sus consecuencias, ya por el desplazamiento, por lo que es. Y creo que no estoy tan de acuerdo en que el libro no apunte a los procesos fundamentales que constituyen la gentrificación. Ahora, no me siento muy cómodo con la palabra gentrificación precisamente por eso. Ya creo que en el término neo-haussmanización, ya que tampoco me gusta mucho porque es muy específico de un momento histórico, etcétera, tampoco es un buen término, pero en cierto sentido apunta mejor a lo que es fundamentalmente lo que ustedes están trabajando en el libro, ya Y creo que abre una ventana muy importante en cuanto a poner el foco en dos cosas. Una, que es la especulación con la brecha de renta, con el rent gap speculation, y otro que es fundamental, me parece, que está en el proceso de humanización, que es esta coalición entre el poder político, normativo, entre el Estado ya, o gobiernos locales, y el capital en términos de producir estos fenómenos de apropiación de renta que finalmente generan desplazamiento, ¿ya? Entonces, lo que encuentro interesante es que si nos vamos solo en la palabra gentrificación, se corre un poco este riesgo de no sé si un riesgo, pero de debilitar en cierta manera la capacidad de resistencia. ¿Por qué? Porque estamos resistiendo el hecho que me desplacen, estamos resistiendo la consecuencia, y creo que se oculta un poco algo previo, que es cuestionar el rol del Estado en este proceso, ¿ya? Porque creo que una real resistencia democrática profunda tiene que ir a desmantelar el origen del proceso, en que hay, por decirlo así, intereses de Estado que van en la dirección inadecuada en términos de un proceso democrático, ¿ya? Entonces, me parece que ahí hay algo que afinar todavía en la semántica, un poco, que pese a que el libro dedica una gran energía a justificar la palabra, ¿ya? No sé si le falta otro adjetivo o algo, pero creo que es un concepto que aún deja como estos espacios de ambigüedad que pueden tener como consecuencia el perder el foco de esta como combate democrático preliminar, sin que sea menos importante también, obviamente, resistir el desplazamiento, sino que reforzarlo con esto otro, que es lo que realmente devela el libro, me parece muy central como aporte.
Muchas gracias, Matías. Tenemos otra pregunta de Abdul Malik Simón y luego de Lisa Mackenzie. Y con eso tenemos que cerrar porque estamos sobre la hora, porque la otra sesión estuvo sobre la hora también.
Thank you. Just going forward, in how to envision a kind of research process.
Is the mic on or off?
Yes.
How to envision how to envision a research process and a methodological approach now that you busted the notion of gentrification wide open in many respects, from a kind of narrow popular understanding of the term. Similarly, one can think about auto construction also as being busted open in terms of including much more of a kind of process than was originally envisioned by Holston's early work. So we know that, for example, in many primary and secondary cities throughout the South, that in lower and working class districts, that there's been this continuous process of recomposition. One can call it urban generation, but residents have never sat still. They've always continued to renovate not only the built environment, but their relationships with each other. And now you reach a point where how would you look at those moments where gentrification and auto construction converge sometimes? They touch upon each other, because part of this kind of recomposition of lower and working class districts plays with some of the conventional tropes of gentrification, resulting in a kind of byproduct of displacement of some, but in the longer term interest of trying to repopulate these areas in a way that gives them a greater hedge against further displacements in the future. So you have these kinds of possible complicities, and how do you think about researching this kind of process perhaps in the future?
Do you want me to go now?
Yeah.
I'd just like to ask the panel how much, because you were talking about gentrification, if we go back to how Ruth Glass described and talked about gentrification, she was talking about class cleansing, and she was talking about social class and the way that one social class is cleansing out another social class. And I've not heard you say much about class within this. And also, as researchers, regarding methodology going forward, how much of a duty do you think we have as researchers to work or not work with governments or political parties or social cleansers with research? Because I know there are many researchers who are taking money to do research from property developers and working alongside those social cleansers. So I'd just like to hear your thoughts on that.
Loretta, Hyun, would you like to reply to any of these questions?
Did you say me, Ernesto?
Yes, you,
Sorry.
Hyun.
I didn't quite hear what you said.
Would you like to reply?
Okay. Well, first of all, I thought I was rather impolite, so I thought I'd just say, well, thank you very much to everybody for their questions. I kind of shot in there on the last bit of critique, and then I thought, oh my God, they're going to think that she's some crazy woman. So thank you, Elvin. It's lovely to see you, and thank you for everybody's comments. But I think if I could go back to Ruth Glass, because I think it's interesting, because it links Elvin's comments to Lisa Mackenzie's comments. And I think it's really interesting that Elvin was talking about the way that Ruth Glass was writing at a time that she was interested in cosmopolitanism. And of course, the time she was writing in London was the 1960s, when there was the kind of beginnings of the immigration that was to escalate in London. So she was really interested in the impacts of immigration on the city. And of course, you know, the corollary of that now is that there's immigration all over the place, and it has, you know, a particular relationship with gentrification. So it's really interesting to kind of go back and think about what she was thinking, and what, you know, some cities that are beginning to have similar, or not similar, but, you know, immigration processes that are impacted their urbanization processes. So I think that's a really kind of fruitful way of going back to some of her earlier writings. I think, Lisa, you're right. We haven't talked about class much today, but the entire book is really about social class. It's about social cleansing. I think there are lots of kind of issues that I have at the moment with actually people making academic careers off researching social cleansing, which I find deeply unethical and problematic in a variety of different ways. And I think it's something perhaps that we need to talk about in gentrification studies at the moment.
Hyun, yes, thank you. Hyun, would you like to reply? Maybe
yes, again, very briefly.
Question?
I also very much like the question from Abdul Malik Simon, although the quality of the transmission was not quite clear. So from what I gather, I think it's, yes, important to understand the concrete relationships between residents and the built environment. And of course, we, in the book, were emphasizing the primary and the secondary circuits of accumulation and that impact on local neighborhoods and communities and so on. But yes, I mean, there's a scope, of course, to really use this abstraction to to climb back, to understand how this influences the concrete daily, everyday life that we encounter, and only by doing so we can really think of more concrete strategies of resistance. So I think three of us are really together in that notion of real acknowledging the importance of making the connection between more structural understanding of the process and the concrete reality of everyday life. And I think there's also scope for researchers working on each aspect to come together to produce a more holistic knowledge, to produce basically more effective strategies of resistance. And just finally, the last question about social cleansers, yes, I do very much understand the frustration, and this is also where we get increasingly concerned about, especially when the money is being provided by developers, by very entrepreneurial government. And a lot of the consultancy works that academics are engaging with does involve this production of knowledges which are working against the right of citizens. So I don't know what to say. I mean, this is really something that we probably have to think about further. But this also comes back to us questioning how we are to understand the role of the state. And in some cases, in some regions, state is perceived to be very exploitative and very brutal, which is also quite true. But in some other contexts, like in Scandinavian or countries, the state is also seen to be something that needs to be needs to work together. So I think there's a very different notion of what the state actually means, how it's being produced, and how policies are being produced. So depending on your own notion of the role of the state, some may prefer to work with government officials to influence the policy outcome. But in other contexts where, especially in Asian context where the state has known to be more brutal in the past, the state is perceived to be something that is to be more criticized and to be more attacked. And I think there's the kind of thing that we need to also understand and needs to be brought in to our discussion of how to perceive the collaboration between the government and other critical scholars. Thank you.
Okay.
And also, before I get disconnected, let me say again, thank you so much for having me in the event, and also for very insightful comments from the commentators.
Oh, thanks you too for being here present, even by Skype. It has been a very, very interesting conversation we are having now. I would like to give the final reply first to Abdul Malik and then to Matthias. And to Abdul Malik, and to go briefly because we are run out of time. And yes, I think, sorry? Can you hear me? Yes. I think there are so many unpredictable outcomes from gentrification we cannot see now. So that needs a long-run research, I think. And there are so many paradoxes too. And when you were talking to us yesterday, Abdul Malik, that gave me a lot of reflections on how the most normative, sometimes very aggressive, vicious urban policies in order to clean socially many spaces in cities of the world. Sometimes the outcomes that come from that are so unpredictable. And one paradox, as an example, in places where you have the more aggressive policies for gentrification, those are usually those ones where reactions and organization and social resistance emerges more neatly and are more productive to give counter responses. So that's something that we need to address more. And that's something that leads us to what Loretta said already. I mean, more research on resistance and responses to gentrification is needed now. So that's a way to understand, in a long run, what is going to take place in cities after gentrification has taken place. And maybe gentrification needs to be seen as a long-run process too. Not something that happens just in a moment in time, but it's something which is a longer project. And for Matthias, short answer. Yes, we need to re-semanticize the word. We need to maybe colonize back the word gentrification. I mean, if people usually often understand gentrification just simply as displacement, well, that's wrong. We need to fool the concept of all its implicances, and that is capital and the flows of capital into space. That is class contradiction. That is the heavy role of the state, as is documented in all the cases we have here, documented in this book, and displacement, of course, of a social class by another one which is more powerful. So yes, we need to take the concept seriously, and we need to re-signify the concept in a different manner. And this is the main attempt, I think, of this book. So I end up with these words. I would like to thank Javier, Ruiz-Tagle. I would like to thank Elvin, Wyly, and my two colleagues, Loretta and Hyun Shin, for being here, and of course everybody of you for coming here to attend, and thank you very much. Bye-bye, you too. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye, Elvin. Bye, guys.
Thanks so much.
You're more organized than I am.
She wants a picture. Ah, all right. Of course. Yeah.
generally about social class and understanding